Morning. Thank you for having me this morning. I feel very privileged to be here on Christmas Eve, actually. Talking to you all. It feels a bit wrong. It should be the vicar this morning, really, shouldn't it? But when I spoke to one of my other vicar friends, actually, she was like, "You're preaching on Christmas Eve." So apparently we've done something wrong in the Church of England. Don't tell the bishop. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie Tugwell. I'm married to Mark. I have two little ones, Daniel and Eden. And because we live in a culture where our identity as a woman, you'll see I'm a feminist, should be more than a wife and mother. There's some other things you should probably know about me. I'm a huge rugby fan, and I have a season ticket at Harlequins in Twickenham. I'm a fan of cats and Harry Potter. I like to sing a bit, and I find teenagers fun. I also do a little bit of social work for the day job. It keeps the brain active and ticking over. So love. When Sarah and Tasha and Kaz and I were working out who was doing what this Advent, and what a privilege again it has been to hear those amazing women speak. We were looking at dates and what worked for us all, of course, but actually I think the topics of hope and peace and joy and love were also a huge draw. And when I landed on Christmas Eve, I thought, great, you cannot have it more simple than that. Love on Christmas Eve. Oh, how wrong I was. As I looked at things and read about love, thought about its implications, I have opened up the biggest can of worms, and trying to shut it has actually been my task over the last few weeks. There is a lot to say about love. Do you know, in the Bible, in the King James Version of the Bible, it's mentioned the word love is mentioned 310 times. But that's only the word love. We have other words that to describe similar aspects, such as charity or affection, and they're repeated many, many times over in the Bible. Google tells me that it is estimated there are 100 million pop songs written about love. And at Christmas, who can resist Love Actually? True story, I'm a people watcher. I think it's why I'm a good social worker. But one of my favourite pastimes when I was younger was to go to Heathrow, I live nearby, and have a coffee in Costa at Arrivals. Well, not coffee because I don't drink coffee. Have a tea at Costa in Arrivals and watch. It's actually a really emotionally moving and an insight into people and relationships. Hugh Grant is right when he says at the beginning of the movie, whenever I'm gloomy with the state of the world, I think about the arrivals gate at Heathrow Airport. General opinion's starting to make out that we live in a world of hatred and greed, but I don't see that. It seems to me that love is everywhere. Often it's not particularly dignified or newsworthy, but it is always there. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends and old friends. When the planes hit the Twin Towers, as far as I know, none of those phone calls were from people on the board were messages of hate or revenge. They were all messages of love. If you look for it, I've got a sneaky feeling you'll find that love actually is all around. So with that in mind, we're going to embark on a little journey of love this morning. I have 3 points to make, like every good sermon preacher, about love, and I'm going to be using Jesus' disciple John to help me make those points. Next slide. So love is all around. God so loved the world. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. You don't get much more Christmas than that, in a sense. Because at the end of the day, Christmas is all about one thing. This very thing, that God so loved this world that he gave his one and only Son. Part of God was incarnate and walking on this earth. That God so loved us. It is so hard to fathom, sometimes, isn't it? The Bible tells us God literally breathed us into being, a literal act of love. We were formed by love, that we are the pinnacle of his creation. Well, women are the pinnacle of his creation, so they came after men. And that even though we went far away from him, he loved us and wanted us reconciled to him. That much, that he became one of us. He endured being human. Now, any one of us here who has lived for a reasonable period on this planet knows that being human is not easy. And yet the creator of the universe sent the part of him, his son, to endure that, and to not only endure human life, but also endure the most excruciating and spiritually crushing death. Don't know about you, but my mind gets a little bit explodey when I try and think about it, to be honest, because that is love. And John helps us here to understand it. For God so loved the world that he gave his son. It was a gift, a present, completely free. It's so easy in the business of Christmas to forget that little baby. We are so obsessed with our perfect moments, the perfect family time, Christmas traditions, matching pajamas, Muppet Christmas Carol or Die Hard, Jamie Oliver's pre-made gravy, that Instagram moment. None of these things are wrong in themselves, and I have no intention of you leaving here today feeling that you have to go home and burn the curated Christmas tree. But these things smack of a world that has forgotten that Christmas is about perfect love, the purest love, rather than a load of stuff. A baby who is God, a God who loves us that much that he gives us a free gift of love. And we get to spend this life and eternity with him. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day. We trained together to be social workers many years ago, but she left the profession a few years ago. I can't imagine why. And to follow her calling, actually, as a vicar, to be a vicar. So she's in her first year of curacy. She's finished her training and she's now a curate. And she was reflecting on Christmas as clergy. And her comment was really striking. She said, I do all of this for Christmas, and yet I have no time to pray. It struck me. She's a vicar, and she's saying that. Is there any hope for the rest of us? Aren't vicars supposed to be the most super spiritual people? Surely they would not have missed the point of Christmas. I can only encourage you, I can only encourage myself that in the busyness over the next few days, take some space. Take some time and rest in the love of this little baby and the story around him. Because for God so loved the world means that God so loved you. You personally. You in all of your faults and your foibles, your talents and your gifts. He loves you. Henry Nouwen, the theologian and spiritual leader who lived in the last century, had a lot to say about that intimate relationship with God. He reminds us that we are all God's beloved, and he is ours. That Song of Solomon's verse, isn't it? I am my beloved's, and he is mine. And that leaning into that title, owning that title of God's beloved, is a core discipline of spiritual life. If you've never read any of his work and want something to help you, his reflections are such a useful tool in embracing that loving relationship with God. Learning how to be loved by a God. That's really hard, isn't it? I'm sure it's not too late to put a book on the Christmas list if you wanted to get into that. But I did tell you that I couldn't make this a guilt trip about enjoying the festivities. Not at Christmas. So you can worry. You worry not. Your orange glazed Christmas ham is safe from the scorn this morning. And John helps us out in understanding why that too, for anyone who's glazed a Christmas ham, especially if you're a vegetarian like myself, well, you will know what an act of love that is. And to love is what we are designed to do. Next, can I have the next slide? Love leaves a mark. Not a Mark, my husband, but a mark. Dear friends, let us love, here's John again. This is in 1 John. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. We love because he loved us first. If you were listening to my introduction, you will know, or if you know me really well, you know that I am a huge Harry Potter fan. I read through the books at least once a year, and I could not tell you how many times I've seen the films. I'm super excited about the new series that's going to last 10 years. I'm even geeking out. I even geek out on fan theories on websites. But for me, I'm a little bit of a purist, and the books hold the key to understanding everything. In book 1, The Philosopher's Stone, there is a beautiful passage at the end of the book where Dumbledore, if you're not a Harry Potter fan, think wizened old wizard, explains to Harry, who's a nearly 12-year-old boy, that love leaves a mark. That when we love, we leave a mark or a trace that lives on in the lives of others. Just over 15 years ago, I was a youth pastor at 2 churches in Brighton, and I was fortunate enough to work alongside a young curate, now Canon Lisa, who was about the same age as me. We caused a lot of mischief, as you can imagine, these 2 young females, for our poor vicar boss, especially as 2 strong, determined women in a diocese that still held a quite anti-women rhetoric at the time. Quite early on in her ministry, Lisa was given the task of leading a really high-profile funeral. In fact, I've asked her permission to share this story. It was held at St. Peter's Church before HTB took it over, as there was going to be so many mourners and press there. It was a really horrible tragedy of a mother and daughter who'd been killed in flash floods abroad, leaving behind a husband and a twin sister. Lisa resolved to make what she was saying relevant to the many young people who were there grieving in that space. And she used an example from Harry Potter of love leaving a mark. That those who love us never really leave us. Lo and behold, on page 2 of The Sun the next day was the following headline. Vicar quotes Harry Potter, not the Bible, from at funeral. That certainly wasn't the case. In fact, she used the 1 John verse we can see on the screen. But actually, those skilled, talented spinners at the Sun had missed the point. The idea that love leaves a mark is entirely biblical and is there in the passage. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. And as we are marked with God's love, as we see the trace of his love in our lives, we begin to mark others with it. We love because he loved us first. And as we serve and we cherish and we hug and we make those displays of love in Christmas hams and curated Christmas trees, from our hearts to those we care about, we leave that mark, don't we? It is evidence from our relationships, be that family or friends. We offer little acts of love to the people we care about, and we do it because we have learned that God loved us. And the more we recognize we are loved by God, the better we are able to love those around us. The fact that you bothered to glaze your Christmas ham, the fact that you bothered to wrap a present rather than just handing it in an Amazon box, or the fact that you endured Die Hard. The fact that you endured Die Hard as your husband insists it's a Christmas movie. Those little acts are acts of love. And they leave a mark. They leave an impression. Think about the converse. When we're irritable or distant from God, we are like, what are we like with those we're close to too as well? Those acts of love become begrudged, resented, or they dissipate. You don't do them. It is because we are loved by the eternal God that we can love, and we can love more, and we can dwell in that love, and we are able to love. And what about the wider acts of love? The beautiful stories of service, anonymous or otherwise, random acts of kindness, or should we call them random acts of love? I follow the local Facebook pages, as a lot of you probably do on your own Facebook profile, just to find out what's going on locally. And for the most part, they provide some useful information if you avoid the moaning posts about potholes. About a month ago, there was a post that just made me feel warm. A single mum had posted a thank you note to an anonymous person who had paid for her shopping when she found herself short. Not just the difference. This woman had paid for the entire shop. That is the act of love that leaves a mark. And it leaves me struck by the words of verse 19. We love because he loved us first. Hear those words again. Next slide. This is on my bestie's wall from her wedding. A daily reminder of why we love, because he loved us first. And we know the ferocity, we've talked about the ferocity and intent behind God's love for us. If we begin to love like that, how much will we change the world? I loved hearing from Rio last week. Her examples of God opening up for her colleagues and how for her to love her colleagues is a beautiful example of this, isn't it? Each of those prayers that she prayed for each of her different colleagues has left a mark on those people. So how can we love the world in 2024 and love it like God does? Maybe for you that looks like giving up some more time to volunteer and serve people. Maybe it is giving more of your money where you know it will make a difference. Maybe it's praying for opportunities like Rio did. How do we leave that God mark? How do we love like him this Christmas and into 2024? I can't answer that for each of you, but I can encourage you to pray and find out. But this comes with a word of caution. Love is costly. And I cannot promise you that if you love, it will come without a cost. In fact, I'm going to reframe that. If you love, it will cost you. Anyone has loved will have experienced loss. And I recognize that this time of year, it is really hard for someone who has experienced that loss, whether it's because those we love have left this mortal coil, or because relationships and family are difficult, like mine. I want to take a moment to encourage you. If you are finding things hard, if you are finding Christmas hard, reach out. Do not suffer alone. There are people in this room who will love you. For to love can only mean that there is a cost. Whether that loss is that is loss or sacrifice, love is a costly act. The weird thing about love, actually, and that's why I kind of opened this can of worms. You give it out as a free gift. We give our love as God gives his love. And it's completely against our cultural understanding and how we're built. We are inherently shaped from a very early age to strive for more, for better, to look after and gain for ourselves. Some people will put that down to the fall and our sinfulness of our hearts. Others, the consumer age that we live in, and more culture. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. What we see is that loving feels weird sometimes. Mark was talking the other day about how when Daniel was born, he never thought he could love another human as much and was really worried when I was pregnant with our second. But as soon as Eden was born, that love was compelling. He couldn't help but love. Some might say that being a parent and loving your child is so natural it does not cost. Well, you're wrong. According to the Times newspaper, it costs, currently at the moment, £223,256 to raise a child from birth to 18 in the UK. Whew. Could buy a house in Swindon for that. Right. So even if you love your child, your bank balance might not. I joke, but actually even loving your child comes at an emotional cost. My sister died of cot death when she was 2 months old. And even now, 41 years on, her birthday is still a day when my mum chooses to spend it with no one, entirely alone. After it happened, my dad sat in my room, I was 2, for hours every night whilst I slept watching, checking I was breathing. He did this for years after it happened. Love costs us. So yeah, do we choose not to love? Of course we don't. And how can we know that we will be okay in that cost? We know because the ultimate price was paid for that cost. And here it is, we've come full circle. That baby, that God-man, grew up and then paid the ultimate cost for us. If there is anyone who knows about the cost of love, it is God. Because for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. He willingly sacrificed his Son, not only to death, but to the cost that each of us should have borne. And the more we experience that love God has shown us, the more time we spend with him, the more we come to understand, the less the cost of that loving becomes. Don't get me wrong. Pain and loss are the hardest things to go through, and I do not take anything from anyone who is in a place of loss at the moment. But it's just this. The more we dwell in God's love for us, the more we love, but the more we rely on that perfect love for us. Receive the comfort, receive that sense of intimacy, and with that, eternal God. For as we see, John tells us, perfect love drives out fear, and fear is often what drives our feelings of loss and grief. That's a really difficult conversation, I'm aware, and I'm not going to dwell too much on that today. But I just want to say to those of you who are hurting, God stands in our pain as he loved us first, but he also understands our pain and suffered the cost of love the most. So let's conclude and bring it back to the baby. Let's remind ourselves that Christmas is ultimately fueled by love, that love actually is all around, that God loves us so much that he sent his Son to be born in a stable with animals watching, where angels were visibly rejoicing, and where 3 men turned up and delivered some very weird gifts. A story fueled by love. And where does this leave your 2023 Christmas story? Are you dwelling in God's purest and most ultimate love for you? That everything that you do then to serve others, including that Christmas ham, becomes an act of love? Are you leaving that mark? Are you leaving that trace? I like to imagine it as like this little stardust walking around us, behind us as we go through life. Because ultimately, let us love one another as he has loved us. Merry Christmas.
Can you pray for us?
God of love, God who loves us, God who knows us, God who calls us beloved. We thank you. We thank you that everything you do for us is an outpouring of love. So teach us, Lord. Teach us as we go through this Christmas period. Teach us as we go into 2024 that everything that we do is an outpouring of love. That as you loved us, so we love. In your holy and mighty and powerful name, Lord. Amen.